pleased to bring you our feature presentation.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very special episode of No Flicks Given. As you can probably tell from the new intro and the title, this is going to be something a bit afield from what we've been normally putting out. One of the things that the guys and I discussed when we were talking about combining forces as a podcast was to be able to branch out and provide a little bit of variety in the kind of discussion and content that we wanted to throw on this feed. So it's my turn to do something like that, and as none of you will be surprised to hear, it is related to Star Trek. Good friend of the show and former guest of Give It 5, Mike, my cousin, has joined me to discuss one of the newer series to come out of Paramount for Star Trek, which is Strange New Worlds. And we sat down, had a very casual conversation about how we got into Star Trek, what we feel about the show, and what we feel about what the Star Trek as a whole is supposed to say about us and for us as a culture and a species. If Star Trek isn't really your bag, you can feel free to skip this one, although I encourage you to give it a listen and just hear two very passionate people talk about a subject that has, in no small way, molded their lives and worldview. And if after that discussion you're intrigued, feel free to hit me up, reach out to us and about any questions you might have about Star Trek or any of the dearth of information that you might be able to find on the internet. So without further delay, I bring to you our discussion on Star Trek Strange New Worlds.
Space. The final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its 5-year mission: to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no one has gone before.
I was overjoyed. I cannot thank you enough for recommending that. I haven't been watching enough stuff lately, and I'm so glad you said you got to check out Strange New Worlds, because I am delighted by it, and I love every single member of that crew. I would ship out with them into peril any old time. They're absolutely fantastic.
Yes.
So today we're gonna do the whole season in one show, right?
Yeah, I mean, I figured, and we'll probably have to do a little bit of like, how did we come to Star Trek?
Oh,
because
God,
we've never really talked about Star Trek on, like, I've referenced it, but we've never actually like talked about it.
I was about to say that's fascinating, and then I realized terrible cliche, so I apologize for that. But I would love to, because I do have strange childhood half memories about how it first kind of came into my life, but we've never talked about that with you, like how.
Yeah,
because and you'd think I would know, having, you know,
you would have been there.
I would have been there for it. So yeah, you go first. How did you begin?
I mean, I have no first memory of Star Trek any more than I think I have first memory of Star Wars. It was just always there.
Yeah,
I think I was trying to think about is like, when did I enter the river that is ever flowing the pantheon of the Star Trek canon? I feel like before I was cognizant, somebody just picked me up and just dipped me in completely, and then was just like, okay, now you're part of it. I have vague memories of, you know, like I remember getting the tape for Wrath of Khan for a birthday early on, but we had like by that point in time, I think we had like the odd numbered films that my dad had kept in the special collector's edition tapes. And like, you know, Next Gen was always on Pix 11 in the New York area. So like, it was just there.
Was Next Gen first for you, do you think? Or
I don't
rather,
think
Con,
so.
you're saying is the first thing?
I think, honestly, motion picture might have, like the motion picture Search for Spock. I feel like there might have been one other that was maybe by that point in time we had the TV taped Undiscovered Country.
Okay.
So it was like, as with everything in the Joseph Conrad library, it's like all random bits and smatterings of a longer story.
It's the best way to do it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, but so I to me, it was always the movie crew was what I remembered first, I think.
Yeah.
And I don't think I saw. I mean, Next Gen was always on in the background, but I don't remember seeing a lot of the earlier episodes until I was older. Until it was like on reruns, and they did like one episode a night for months and months and months.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you too about what like the emotional temperature of it was, because when I think back, it's funny because I think I have, again, memory is unreliable, but I feel like I have extremely, almost eerily concrete memories of first exposures to Star Trek, like 3 or 4 of them.
Okay.
And the general feeling each time, each first contact, was basically terror and dread. The way a lot of kids, I think, describe Doctor Who, which I've never been like I should be a Whovian because it's wonderful, but for some reason it wasn't my thing. But I remember hearing a lot of kids' first exposure to Doctor Who is like hiding behind the couch from Daleks and stuff like that. So what was your sense of it when you were a kid?
There was definitely terror with regard to the SETI Alpha 5 worms in Wrath of Khan. I remember not being able to be like present in the room when that scene occurred as a young child.
Oh, you got it right. Yeah.
Yeah. But my earliest like really distinct memory was watching the motion picture, all of the beauty shots of the Enterprise, and then just immediately going back and rewinding it and watching it over and over and over again. Just that sequence.
Yeah, I thought of that watching Strange New Worlds too, because they do it again, and I thought it's very fast, but it's still a statement. And I just thought, I've heard so many people make fun of the grand tour of the Enterprise in Star Trek: The Motion Picture, but we've been doing it every time now for almost 45 years. There is a power in that. So I'm glad it's your first kind of memory of it.
Yeah, I mean that's that, and then I remember my dad built like an AMT model of the Enterprise A with like the lights and everything.
Yeah,
that I think I had to. I mean, because Nikki was a kid, my brother, and I think at some point over the course of the year or two that we had it, playing around with it, it broke a couple times. And after like the second or third time, my dad was like, I think I'm done with trying to repair this thing that really should just be kept like somewhere else on display.
And did you was Nicky along for the ride? Did you kind of drag him into it? Because I remember he had some enthusiasm for it, but not quite the phaser sharp intensity of your love for Star Trek as a kid. Yeah, I might be misremembering that too. I don't know.
I think Nicky has other greater loves, but I think, but he was still very much our, like, Nicky and I would watch, like, Star Trek used to be on reruns on like Spike and TNN and stuff, and like and Voyager was live and airing late 90s, early aughties on UPN.
Yeah.
And that was the one night we were allowed to stay up late because it was Wednesday nights at 9 and bedtime was normally 9, but we were allowed to stay up until 10 if it was an episode of Voyager. So after the terror, though, obviously it became something of an obsession.
It's weird. Yeah. I mean, an obsession, it's not so much an obsession. It's not intrusive. It just feels like in some ways I calibrated off of Star Trek, and a lot of its priorities kind of became my priorities, as far as, I mean, obviously there are some missteps, especially in early Trek, but just the general thrust of it, of interest in science, interest in exploration, interest in amity, it's all kind of gotten in there. Interest in certain shapes of collar on a shirt, you know what I mean? Like I feel like it's just deep in a very calibrating kind of influence in my life. It just occurred to me too, the fear part is important because that's another calibrating influence that a lot of Star Trek is about, how to deal with fear and not reacting in confrontational ways when you're scared by something, when something's different from you. And so it's so cool that now, like, I thought it was just a misapprehension on my part that I'm, like, I think the first episode I remember seeing was The Lights of Zatar. And the first thing that stuck in my head was that thing, like, this crew member turning colors and making that horrific noise.
Ever seen anything like that before? Negative.
But it's like important to have that first. I don't want to sound like Bruno Bettelheim, and his advice that kids should have terrifying fairy tales in their lives, but maybe that fear thing wasn't so dumb as an initial response.
Yeah. I mean, well, it's and however many episodes of Star Trek are mysteries of like, oh, it's not evil, we just don't quite understand how it works.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
it's like, take a second.
Yeah.
And let's see what's going on.
Yes. How do we? Yeah. That's one of the big kind of calibrating things.
The Trek of the, so we went through, there's been like 3 major phases of Star Trek. So there's the original Gene and Gene stuff with DC Fontana and all that. And that goes until the motion picture. And then the movie period with Harv Bennett and Nick Meyer, that's kind of its own thing. But then you have the Berman era, which is the 90s up until the end of Enterprise. And now we've got essentially Kurtzman, because he was the one who was attached to the original 09 soft reboot movie.
Yeah.
And Star Trek went back onto TV in 2017, something like that. And I've watched all of it, and I've been waiting for like the show that hits me to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like years and years ago, I was like, you know what they should do if they were going to do a Star Trek show is just like do Captain Pike, because it's, if you can go to the original series and you can not have to redo Kirk.
Yeah. Although put a pin in that.
Yeah.
Put a pip in that, I suppose.
Yes.
If it's Star Trek. Yeah.
So then finally they picked up on what I was putting out telepathically. And I had some good feelings because I liked Anson Mount from when he showed up on Discovery. And I was like, all right, maybe this could work. And everybody seemed to be really excited. They said they were going to do episodic stuff. And then I started watching it and I was like, I think I might really like this show.
Yeah. Yes. The same.
And then at some point you had brought up, I think it was still photos from one of the later episodes of like, is this what it looks like? I was like,
yeah,
I've been watching it and I think I do actually kind of like it. Maybe you should check it out.
Yeah. No. And I thank you so much for doing that. And yeah, it was a still, I think it was a Twitter account called The Spaceshipper. And it was a picture of Anson Mount in the captain's chair with red halo light. And then this very diffuse, kind of front light. And I was like, that's thing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The selective keys, they use those two, like it was a complete, it was just a love letter to original series photography, but reinvented in this completely inspired, completely fresh way. And that was my first, the double doors swished open.
Oh yeah.
And I started watching Strange New Worlds. Well, to make reference to, an earlier show of yours. What was your give it 5 moment in Strange New Worlds when you thought you might like it around here?
The moment, it was one of my favorite moments of the original Cage pilot is the scene between Pike and Dr. Boyce, I think was the doctor at that point. Yep. And it's just two people talking about their troubles, but like the doctor bartender kept discussion. Uh-huh. And when Pike has a similar kind of interlude with Spock, like as they're on their way to wherever the emergency is.
Most humans, we like to think that right until the very last instant, somehow, some way, we'll cheat death. At least I did.
Is it soon?
Only you could ask that question. No. It's almost a decade away. Is that soon? Suddenly that feels soon.
It's just like Anson Mount's pathos about knowing his fate. What was your initial response? Like when you started to put it, I think the only thing I showed you was like the intro of the series with
Yeah.
the, which is, it's the first show in how long now that has done Space: The Final Frontier? Because I feel
it's been a while.
Yeah. So I sent you that, but that was the only real primer besides I think it's good.
I think it had seeped in, like the design of it and the spirit of it, just through stuff like the stills that I had, I referenced, the picture of that amazing lighting. But yeah, I was watching it feeling that it was this very beautiful, wildly entertaining, fun thing. And I think the first thing that really struck me, and I didn't realize it had struck me, was when I saw that they were using real January 6th footage in the scene in the pilot, as a warning to this other planet, not to follow in our footsteps. And I thought at the time, I was like, oh, what a bold and exciting choice in this entertaining space opera that I'm watching. And I did not realize how much it had affected me until I was describing it to someone on the phone later. And Matthew, I began to weep on the telephone describing that scene. And I realized the reason was I had personally given up on Star Trek future, or really like any future, because of things that include January 6th. And the show was saying, no, that's part of the story. And despite awful things, we are still on the way. And I think that's what Star Trek's been trying to do since the start. The human adventure is just beginning, taking all the, screw ups in the present moment and showing us how we might find a better way someday. And this show goes an additional step, which sometimes earlier Star Treks, I think, did, which is we'll still be getting some things dreadfully wrong in the 23rd century.
Yeah.
So sometimes, and I'm curious about your thoughts about some of that stuff too, because every once in a while I have it's like, well, I don't like this in my Star Trek.
Yeah.
But I think on reflection, it's like, first of all, how dare I? And second, maybe it's actually good that it's in there. So there are several, as we discuss this, I think a few of those will come up. If you want to get to them now, I can kind of riffle through my notes here. Yeah.
I guess the line that I have is and it's probably not his fault, but it's the same way that I this is a Brandon Braga episode, isn't it? It's this, there are moments in each episode I feel like that are, this is Kurtzman, isn't it? And I'm not ascribing that directly to him, but he tends to the grim. I'm trying, and it becomes fairly prevalent with a lot of the Gorn things that show up later on.
Yes, Gorn put yet another pip in Gorn.
I think most of the first episode, threaded that needle pretty well. The one point that I was like, okay, we can ease off the accelerator a bit is when La'an has her monologue about, again, Gorn birthing sacks, and I was like, that's cool, but no, we got the point. You said it more succinctly and more concise with the not thinking you're going to get killed is what you're not thinking you're going to die is what gets you killed. That is great.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's we don't have to go into the wallowing portion of just really getting into the grief of it all.
Yeah. Well, the show very frequently stops so that a character can explain a past horrible thing that for a while it seemed like every episode had a brief monologue about that. But I wonder if that's a thing that audiences are demanding now from a lot of TV shows. Is that happening a lot?
It's an easy way to manufacture sympathy for a character. Mm-hmm. But and this is something that's been discussed online with regards to is everybody in Strange New Worlds an orphan or had some whatever terrible thing happen to them? But then I start to think about thinking about everybody else's past in the original series wasn't necessarily hunky-dory great either, because Kirk has this terrible backstory where he lived on a colony where there was a mini Holocaust, and and then in Next Gen it's Beverly Crusher's husband died in some terrible accident, and Wesley's got to deal with that. Worf's parents were killed in a massacre. Riker's mother died when she was young and his father wasn't great. I guess it's still part of Star Trek to have characters that are like that.
You bring up an excellent point, as always, which is that almost every time in the show I wanted to raise my hand and say objection, there's some precedent for it. And I can now think of Tasha Yar and the gangs that were chasing her, and how we actually got a flashback in an image of that too. Yeah, so it's happened before.
Do you know how old I was when I was abandoned? 5 years old. But I survived. I learned how to stay alive, how to avoid the rape gangs. I was 15 before I escaped.
Yeah.
But so to that point, and to the Gorn, poor Gorn, I thought when I saw that episode, the penultimate one of the season, like, you can't just do Alien, can you? And then I realized, there's even Alien/Aliens. There's even a newt. In fact, there's 2 newts, because there's another Gorn survivor named Fig, who first tips us off that the Gorn are around by making the least scary noise in the world. It's Captain, either the Gorn or a flamenco dancer is on the loose. But I found in the original TOS pitch by Gene Roddenberry, the very last paragraph in that is an episode idea for something called Infection, which has an alien implanting a larva in a crew member's body, quote, like some insects plant their eggs in other living insects, unquote. And this is 16 years before Alien.
Yeah.
But then it's kind of upsetting because the point of the TOS Gorn episode, Arena, seemed to be like, congratulations, human, on not killing the scary monster. You're both from civilizations. You can understand each other. But now there are these parasites that spit a combination of venom and something we can't mention on a family podcast. And they have...
Yeah.
What do you make of all that?
That's the thing I struggle with, is like they could have made them a brand new species that has no other relationship to any other Star Trek species.
Yeah.
And it would have worked a little bit better for me, because again, in my head, I'm like, after all of these terrible things that we are witnessing and hearing about in this show, Kirk's going to hug one like it's a middle school dance.
Yes, exactly right. And you could see them do it, like, you have the sense they want to do a TOS-tinged Borg or Species 8472, and Gorn is probably the closest thing you can get to it. But it's like, do you bend Star Trek too much to make them the xenomorph, basically?
Yeah. And I Steve Shives, a YouTuber, talks about this, because he's one of the guys who does not care about canon or continuity whatsoever. And so he's just like, when I watch Arena, I just watch it in the lens that for the purposes of this story, nobody's ever seen a Gorn before, and you can make peace with them. While when I watch episodes of Strange New Worlds, they're xenomorphs. Yeah. And I understand that, and I understand that I shouldn't care. It's just, I think it's one of those, I don't understand why we had to use that. Like, if you were going to do something this fresh and different, why give it the baggage of an existing thing? Sure.
And then I guess the additional thing on top of that is that a Star Trek-y thing to do, which apparently it is, because it's from the very beginning a kind of story idea that Roddenberry wanted to do. So I don't know.
I also just finished reading the novelization of the motion picture, and there's a lot of things in that book that is a little weird.
Kirk knew that the compelling attraction which Deltans exercised on anyone of the opposite sex went further than mere physical appearance. It was literally chemistry, and an unsuspecting human was likely to find himself in considerable sexual excitement without understanding why. Kirk concentrated on handling it with suitable formality. He could feel the pheromones working on him, and he decided not to rise. He was, after all, the ship's captain.
This is a good thing to bear in mind going forward, that you can't just invest any one member of the team with total authority, I guess.
Yes, and it's I understand, because I've read the online debates and seen all the videos of people who do defend all the things that I find kind of like in this new era of Star Trek, is like, but look at what Gene did, or look at what whatever did. And I was like, I get it, but like, it's also not 1978 anymore. Like, it's also like, we should know to learn from some of those hiccups and maybe switch things around, because ultimately I'm very curious to see if the ultimate intention of the writers for this show are to make the Gorn something that is worthy of making peace with, like, because they're starting off on a very low point, and from my perspective, they've earned enough trust from me at this point that it's within the realm of possibility that I could believe that they would try to stick this landing.
Yeah.
But yeah, as it stands right now, I'm like, oh man, when the Gorn show up, I'm like, okay. I just pretend that they're not the one that I remember from Arena.
Sure. It's so interesting too, because whereas the content of the show, I feel, has kind of seeped into my awareness from things like social media, the conversation about it has not at all. So I'm so curious as I kind of go down, my laundry list of stuff here, if it's stuff that people are actually talking about.
It's so, I mean, generally speaking, there's been, in much the way that the Star Wars fandom has been kind of factionalized, Trek's always been like this, because and whenever the new show comes out, there's everybody who says it stinks.
Yeah.
There was the same thing when Discovery came out, when Picard and all the other shows have been coming out, of just like people who are looking for the old school, or not, well, now old school Berman era, like everything's evenly lit, it's episodic, whatever. Yeah. And then there's the people who are looking for more serialized, dramatized stuff. And so like Strange New Worlds has been this weird meeting ground for a lot of people, because like it seems to have enough of the old stuff that group of fans enjoys it. And then there's a decent amount of like the new serialized or melodrama stuff that group is also in on it. So Strange New Worlds has been this one touchstone for most of the fandom to be like, yeah, no, I like it.
Yeah, I now, with some embarrassment, realize which camp I fit into because of the total joy I experienced upon seeing Captain Pike's chartreuse Balanchine dancer style wraparound tunic that
right?
William Shatner used to wear. I lost my mind. So yeah, now I know.
All
I'm
of the costume
the old guys. Yeah, this is the other thing that's so interesting. I love those costumes. My initial impression was, this is not, and maybe it's just because I was a naive kid watching this stuff. I'm now a naive adult watching this stuff, but like it didn't feel like they were functional uniforms for people. They felt like beautiful, impressionistic, like heightened versions. And I wonder if that's just because it's now 2022, or if that's kind of what they're going for.
I feel like, as good as an episode as it was, Trials and Tribulations kind of broke how everybody sees the original series. Yep. Because I think up until that point, even like Roddenberry and that crew, they're like, this is a stage play retelling of the stories of the USS Enterprise.
Yeah.
And when like the movie came out, they were like, yeah, no, this is the way that we always wanted the ship to look.
Yeah.
But then Forrest Gump comes out and they decide to do...
I pictured him coming out in Star Trek. Like, whoa, I missed. When did Forrest... He's a time traveler. He's not just getting around through history. I'm sorry. So Forrest Gump kind of recalibrates people's... For the
inserting digital characters, and then for at that point, it was the 30th anniversary?
Sure.
They send the Deep Space Nine crew literally back to the 1960s sets.
Yes. Yeah.
And so from that point, all the continuity people have been trying to like wrestle around how that works.
Yeah.
And why any of that makes sense.
Yes.
And I feel like this has been a good kind of visual, not reset, but just like, yeah, it's close enough to like everything has the same vibe of what.
Yes.
Like the bridge is updated so that it looks like a more modern bridge because it's not 1966, and it doesn't have to be the exact, plywood looking set in order for it to be true to the history of this story.
But I see you've cracked it. That's exactly what it is. It's like a little bit of a wink. It feels modernized, but also like this is a little stylized. We're not quite asking you to believe this is a literal thing. Yeah,
and I think because if you look at the Memory Alpha article on this era of uniforms. They've now divided it into like 3 or 4 class uniforms of like, some of them wore these velour uniforms and other people wore these ones with the Delta patterns and the whatever. And then there was a third kind that
the paperwork.
Yes. It's the exhaustive like article on how all of this worked. And it's like, it's fine. We understand how theater works. Yeah.
And that's the thing, like that leads to one of my favorite, if not my favorite, visual thing in the whole series, which is in the Gorn/Alien/Aliens episode.
Yeah.
The wreck of the Peregrine.
Yeah.
Looks like one of the James Blish novel covers by, I think they're painted by an artist named Lou Feck. And it wasn't quite like, it was so stylized, but it just felt like this additional world that we couldn't see, given the technologies they were making the show with at the time. So it's a classic, beautiful image.
Yeah. And they're making use of whatever Paramount's version of the volume is.
Yes. Yep.
So it's been my favorite thing since Mandalorian came out, of like, I begrudgingly admitting that George Lucas was right. He was just very ahead of his time.
I may have gone too far in a few places.
Well, that's the thing. Like I'm a beneficiary of that too. You're a beneficiary of it, because I really don't think anybody would have taken digital video cinema seriously without it being championed by those movies and now volumes and things. Yeah. I feel like the volume is an anti-democratizing thing though, because I can afford a Vive sensor on a camera. I can afford Unreal Engine because it is free. I cannot afford a 10-story tall LED television set, because every other component of it you can do. But yeah, it's just having an actual video wall. The Lon and Una on the primary hull on the saucer, like it's
such a smart, like for all of the banging on having to like focus on characters giving monologues, it's such a perfect moment because it's silent. You're watching it happen, and instead of anybody actually saying the words out loud, and they just watch it go. And I was like, that's writing 101. Like,
don't tell all the characters to shut up. It's so funny though. I dream of the video wall, Matt, and I live pretty close to the Disney Manhattan Beach studios where they shoot that stuff. And I only state this for the podcast record because it's like a minute if I've got the address right.
Yeah.
Or not the address, like the neighborhood right. Because it's still very secretive. I don't really quite know where it is. I think I know I'm basically just, you can tell I'm a production facility stalker at this point. I apologize. But it's so close to the location original series used for the Deneva colony where Sam Kirk passes away. Yeah. And, what a town. It's amazing to think that a half century ago, poor Sam Kirk is getting attacked by evil omelets. What do you make of Sam Kirk? I loved that fake out where we hear about Lieutenant Kirk expect Jim and get Sam. Yeah. And I love that his mustache, which famously William Shatner wore when essaying the role in the original series himself, but it reminds me so much of Sam Rockwell's Guy from Galaxy Quest that I thought I couldn't love the character more, but when that occurred to me, the love increased.
I'm not even supposed to be here. I'm just crewman number 6. I'm expendable. I'm the guy in the episode who dies to prove the situation is serious. I gotta get out of here.
It's terrible for his legacy because I don't think we actually see him getting killed by the evil omelet creature in the original series.
No, he's already,
But now we know he was probably doing something really dumb.
Yeah, no, and somebody, at some point somebody goes, I wonder if like at the end of the show when they decide to send Sam Kirk off, he's like, I'm sorry, Chris, I have to leave. It's just too dangerous here. I'm going to go settle down in a colony where things are quieter and I can be safe and raise my family.
Oh my God. Oh my God. It's so fun that location too, as one final note on what a crazy town it is here. In addition to it being the Deneva colony, it's called Space Park it's also where the company TRW used to be, and they built what is arguably humanity's first interstellar starship, which was Pioneer 10.
Oh, wow.
So they were in a real, like it's an actual historic location about spacefaring, but they also, I think, built like ICBMs. So we're back to the,
I mean, that's the space
yeah.
story.
There's always a kind of a catch. It's always Anson Mount speech in that hall. Yeah.
Even in the canon of Star Trek, the first warp vessel was built out of an ICBM.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that. Yeah, that's right. I was so curious watching this season too, because I remembered one of your sources of affection for Star Trek is what you've described as competency porn.
Yes.
And like, I think you're in the majority with that. My favorite characters tend to be people like Arthur Dent in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, who are just utterly out of their depth, because that's kind of how I feel going through life.
Yeah.
In the original series of Star Trek, one kind of forgets how often Kirk admits total insecurity and indecisiveness. We just kind of remember as bravado. The J.J. Abrams movies, it seems to be about imposter syndrome a lot, and people getting like instantly promoted from like kindergarten to grad school.
Yeah.
And this show, Strange New Worlds, seems like it is constantly saying like, you're in Starfleet, you're the finest person alive, as like the start. Which I guess can enhance, like if the perils they're facing are still perilous to people like that, they must be pretty perilous. How did you react to everyone knowing a great many languages and being the top of their class and all that sort of stuff?
That I'm pretty familiar with, because Next Gen establishes that pretty early on, that like Starfleet Academy is this like, you need to be the best of the best just to get into the place.
Yeah, we see them taking their SATs basically in one of the episodes.
Yeah, so like it's
going
back. Going back to that. Yes, part of the things that I didn't like about that, even when I was a kid growing up, was like feeling that I would never measure up to making it to Starfleet Academy.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. That's one of the Star Trek messages that I kind of calibrated on. That it's not super people who are doing this. It's very fallible, ordinary people, and I see how Next Generation starts to erode that. So you were taking that on board and going like, I don't know if I'm going to.
Yeah, like that was very much, I remember that being like, oh God, this looks impossible.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there is, speaking of the motion picture novelization, Gene writes a lot about like how people in Starfleet are a certain older breed of person, and they're always bucking up against the new humans.
Yes.
And so I feel like that's kind of baked into the mythology in one shape or form as well.
It's true. I had the immense pleasure of a conversation with Susan Sackett about that, who was, she's written a ton of Star Trek books. She was on the rec deck in the famous motion picture rec deck scene. Yeah. She was Gene's assistant for years and years and years. And she said that felt weird to her, though, that there was something. I was like, was Gene like secretly really kind of like stiff about that stuff? Like it just didn't feel like it was coming from him. And she was like, yeah, I don't think was really his whole idea. But I say this so you can rest easy. You will get into Starfleet Academy, Matt. It's going to be okay.
Yeah. And I think that it's good. I think this series at least has enough of a balance of like, yes, Uhura speaks dozens of languages, but she's also like feels very out of her depth in a lot of situations. Isn't sure if she feels like she's going to measure up to the situation that she's in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I really like that second episode because of what that does for her character.
Yeah.
So I think at least it struck enough of a decent balance, and like we're back to captains who drink alcohol again.
It's Dory and Brandy, in fact.
Yeah,
but not out of the original Tennessee whiskey horn from the 60s, but maybe,
which is surprisingly affordable if you look them up on eBay. I was thinking about using it as a decanter at some point.
They made a lot of those. That was I think more popular than you'd think. But given that response to kind of competency in this new show, how do you feel about the Una superhero reveal. Hashtag not all augments.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I was wondering if they were going to go that route, because I think that that's something that is in... I think DC Fontana wrote something about Una's backstory of being this genetically engineered thing years and years ago.
Really? That comes from her?
I'm pretty sure.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
Yeah. I'm like, cause, and like her, like, that's why her name is Una. She's like the top of her group that was born or whatever.
Yeah. Is the name Una older than the show? Because that was another thought I had that I felt was a little uncharitable, because I was kind of like, Una, like, come on. Number one is named Una. This seems a little on the nose.
I believe it's original to the DC. Let me actually see where. Yes. In the novel Vulcan's Glory by Star Trek Original Series writer DC Fontana, suggested this character's moniker was not simply a nickname or title. She was an Illyrian, so the Illyrian bit is also from that book, who was called Number One as the best intellect among her generation.
Oh my God. Well, I've unforgiven myself, because if it comes from her...
You've restored my father's
fine
faith.
by me. Exactly. Right. I'll take it.
Yeah, here we are. A quote from Vulcan's Glory. Some officers had a difficult time dealing with the fact that she is a genetically perfect being. On her planet Illyria, excellence is the only criterion that is accepted. She is technically designated as being the best of her breed for the year that she was born. I see. She therefore would receive the appellation Number One, even if she were not the executive officer.
Wow.
DC Fontana.
I got wonderful Tarangalila vibes from Rebecca Romaine's performance of Una too. Did you detect that too?
She just, there's this, I like, there's this contained, like she is weird. She knows she is weird, and she's keeping it inside, but she lets it out every once in a while. And I appreciate that. Like, I mean, the in the Spock and Muck episode, like, where her and La'an are just running through Enterprise Bingo. I thoroughly enjoy all of that. Like, it doesn't seem out of character for me. I feel like, they're just letting loose. We just had a really serious episode. They're just kind of, this is their version of relaxing. I don't know how much they're going to go into it. The other thing too is, and I've heard these complaints too, is that Rebecca Romaine isn't in the show nearly as much as you would think for someone who's the first officer, and I don't know whether that's just scheduling stuff or what. So I think I'm curious to see how they play that fight in the second season. Like, I'm waiting for my courtroom episode. Like, that's one of the ones they haven't checked off the list yet.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's what there. It does feel kind of like the, is Locutus going to stay Locutus moment. Yeah.
And I was okay with that being like the one of the serialized bits that we're going to pick up with next season.
Yeah.
Did you respond to it differently with like the genetically engineered stuff, or?
Well, I had thought, again, it was, I love the fallibility of the characters in Star Trek, and I worried that having super people in this would kind of kill that. And then I realized we've had super people the whole time, notably Spock and Data. And then I thought, they have huge liabilities. They're at war with their emotions, or they're like Pinocchio trying to be human.
Data's taken over the ship several times.
Exactly. And then, but Una also has this kind of liability of being a secret criminal. And then it was like, this brings eerie dystopia into Star Trek. And I'm not sure I like the idea, that the Federation is still persecuting people based on a group they belong to. But then it's interesting to explore that based on what we were saying a little earlier in our conversation. And it's definitely less disturbing than when dystopia creeps into Star Trek in this kind of casual way. Like in the original series, when it's like women can't be starship captains, or there's all this weird colonial stuff, haggling for dilithium, or having proxy wars with the Klingons. Exactly. So I am like you, excited to see how that develops going forward.
Yeah, they've built enough trust with me that I'm willing to see where they go with it.
Yeah.
Because I honestly I really like the way they handled the Captain Pike knowing his future thing.
Yeah, me too. Initially I thought this is very magical, and I'm not so sure about it. But now I think, completely sold. It's a really great way to go about the arc of the whole thing. Yeah,
and getting to do It's a Wonderful Life episode with the road not traveled. Just all around, I think they've done a good job of trying to balance all of the different moving parts that have to be sort of part of a Star Trek show, and doing it in a way that doesn't tip it too far in any one direction. Like, I know Deep Space Nine liked to deconstruct the idea of Starfleet and the Federation, which I wasn't crazy about.
Yeah. And that thread gets super picked up with J.J. Abrams movies, where there are these sort of shadowy factions inside Starfleet. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, there's always going to be evil admirals and ambassador politician people who don't know what they're talking about. But the idea that the Section 31 crap of there's a clandestine sanctioned part of Starfleet that does the dirty work, so that Captain Picard talks a good game, but nothing's really getting done unless we kill some people quietly. And ultimately, I feel like Starfleet and the Federation should still be the thing that we aspire to, and not, just another metaphor for the United States in space.
Yeah, that's true. It's like show the way and shine a light. It's good to show that people will still be screwing things up in our utopian future, but maybe not quite as I keep thinking of George Lucas's handwritten note to himself that the Empire is the United States in about 10 years. And you don't want to, maybe you don't want to do that so much, I guess.
Yeah, well, and I think we've had our fair share of, science fiction has been mostly dystopian for the last, since 9/11, pretty much. I mean,
look around, Matt. It's pretty grim out there.
Yeah. So that's kind of what I've been craving is something a little bit more positive and forward thinking of yes, we have these problems. There should be a group of people who are all right, what are we going to do?
Yeah. And again, directly incorporating the problems that are worrying you from day to day now.
Yeah.
It's a way to foster some hope.
Yeah. And that's been one of the saving graces of this show. And even for all the crap that Discovery's caught, the last season actually did a good job of metaphor and talking about communication and having real humanist themes of trying to explore. I still have, doing a 10 episode arc about the same thing for me was pacing wise, not crazy about, but getting to that point where we're instead of just continuously navel gazing, we're looking a little bit up again.
The whole show was an attempt to say that humanity will reach maturity and wisdom on the day that it begins not just to tolerate, but to take a special delight in differences in ideas and differences in life forms. If we cannot learn to actually enjoy those small differences, take a positive delight in those small differences between our own kind here on this planet, then we do not deserve to go out into space and meet the diversity that's almost certainly out there.
Yes, yeah. And again, I was not expecting that. I just thought it would be a very shiny, Flash Gordon-y thing. And it absolutely did that in a time when it's hard to create that kind of feeling.
Yeah, I think the first episode set the table for me. The Children of the Comet episode I really did enjoy because it was kind of light and just very straightforward.
Yeah.
And then it was enough to keep me along in the themes of communication and stuff like that. And then we got a submarine episode right after that. So I was hook, line, and sinker.
The Comet episode felt like that wonderful game that used to have at your house a million years ago.
Oh, the 25th anniversary game.
That's it. Yeah, the 25th anniversary game. It felt like part of that, and I enjoyed. Yeah.
I finally beat after 30 years in the help of a very large guidebook.
Congratulations. I just would I eventually just had to enjoy the vibe of being in those environments because I was useless at the puzzles.
I mean, because the problem is that they weren't really puzzles. They were just whoever was developing it was oh, this will be cool. And ultimately when you're actually playing, it's but none of this makes sense within the logic of point-and-click adventure games. But like, yes, the Comet episode was very much that. I think what delineates it a little bit from the original series too is that one of the things, as I've been going through the TNG Blu-rays, that a positive change that Michael Piller introduced into the storytelling, especially with Next Gen, it was like, this episode's going to be a Worf episode. This episode's going to be a Crusher episode. And being able to focus on characters, have them actually have lives. You get to focus on characters who have serialized arcs. So it's not just they hit the reset button at the beginning of, or the end of every episode. And the stories can be episodic, but ultimately like stuff that's happening to them you can reference later, or it becomes part of their character and like they can change over the course. You
kind of get that in the previous Leons as well, where they hand it to one or another different member of the crew,
which I almost wish they didn't do previous Leons, because I feel like you don't necessarily need it, but I like the fact that like it makes it feel less serialized.
It's true. I wonder if it's for people who are jumping in rather than committing to a binge.
Yeah, because it also like sets you up for, especially the penultimate episode, where it's like, oh, we're seeing a lot of Hemmer, and Hemmer's talking about like how someone's fulfilled their purpose after they've fixed everything that's broken. I don't know if he's making it.
That's right. I started to feel a great concern for Hemmer, especially given that he was in the middle of Aliens. Well, I mean, we're speaking of the penultimate one, the ultimate episode.
Yes.
I basically jumped for joy, but I don't know if we want to get there yet. I don't know if you want to go into that now. I have other little topics and stuff like that. If you want to get into them, they're kind of like a lightning round, but I'm also happy to start off with episode 10, which
we can do the lightning round and then get into because the finale is its own thing.
Okay. First item, hit it. In the original pilot, do you remember what Captain Pike used to say?
Does he say engage?
He said engage, but now that's taken.
Yeah.
And so I think this is like a really cool combo of Han Solo's punch it, but yet feels appropriate for the space 1950s, which this is.
Yes.
It's like he's starting a jazz set.
Yes.
So yeah, what was your thought about the first hit it?
I enjoyed that. I think it's become a thing of like every captain has to have their go-to order thing. They do bring up the fact that captains have catchphrases in Star Trek Discovery. That's one of those like, I don't know if it's being a little too cute or not, but it's fine.
Are they? So they're semi-critical about it, I guess. It's just pointing it out.
Yes, but yeah, I am here for Pike's command style.
Yeah.
Like at some point someone threw around the term space daddy, and I was like, well, that kind of,
he's vulnerable, and I guess that's a dad thing too, right? That it's commanding, but also like, well, I don't know quite what I'm doing.
Yeah. But like wanting to be nurturing and empathetic.
Yeah.
And ultimately like, just being in a position of leadership.
Yeah.
But yeah, everything about his portrayal of the character I enjoy. I'm glad that he's not nearly as mopey as he is in the cage. I enjoy Jeffrey Hunter as Chris Pike, but he does in just those 50 minutes come off as someone who really doesn't enjoy his job. And it's like, why are we doing a show about a guy who doesn't like the job that
I
he's
never
doing?
thought about that. You're exactly right, because Anson Mount is solving that problem. I think Jeffrey Hunter comes off with this very not strange. He does a fantastic job, but it's kind of like a stern, fierce mopiness, which I had not yet encountered. But you're right. Anson Mount figures out how to inject energy into it, despite the fact that he does not want to be there. In fact, his life seems to depend on him not being there. I mean,
that's especially in the early episodes of like, that's kind of he knows where he's headed if things continue as they are. Although there have been moments of levity where he like does, the quietly whispering is like, I love this job. There is a part of him that like, honestly, I mean, he wouldn't stick around if there weren't something about it that he really truly enjoyed.
Well, two thoughts on that. The first, thinking about your concern about the space SATs and making the cut as a Starfleet officer in life. this show continues the tradition in Star Trek of training exercises being the most dangerous thing of all. Pike melts like candle wax. The Peregrine landing party, which ends up being the movie Alien/Aliens, is a training excursion with cadets, and then the entire film of The Wrath of Khan. So I could see why you were probably very nervous about qualifying for anything, or
Yeah, you want to get past the midshipman phase.
That's right.
Otherwise, it's no good.
Enlisted, get that red shirt back in the drawer.
There's a bell curve of like how potentially melted your fins can get, and then it curbs.
That's
off.
right. Oh yeah, it is about. That's right. It gets very dangerous towards the end of the career.
Yeah,
too. Yeah.
There's just a lot of radiation exposure in that early career stuff.
This show helped me with my journey of self exploration as well, partly through Pike's command style, in that there's a line in the fourth episode where he says,
"That brown dwarf that you mentioned before, it's pretty much a gas giant, right?"
And I realized that I am a pedant and will always be very pedantic.
I like the fact that he's not the smartest person in the room. But he knows how to harness the intelligence of everybody around him and channel that into successful situations. Yeah. And yes, part of that is blind luck, but that's kind of always Star Trek, any type of leadership situation.
Yeah.
Where you're hedging a bet on something.
Yeah. And that's the thing. You have this kind of Sukomachia thing in the original Star Trek, this kind of ego-id and super ego, like or an angel on one shoulder, a devil on the other, like where Kirk is the
pathos logos ego,
the person, and Spock and McCoy are kind of impulses. I mean, I guess you don't have to read it that way, but in this, it feels more like Pike is a member of the team as opposed to like the person who has these conflicting impulses in him.
Yeah.
Speaking of Kirk and his management style and who he is.
Yes.
Paul Wesley, I found absolutely thrilling in this role. And it's like this thing from, I think just this year, by Daniel Voshart, which was called the Roman Emperor Project, where he took like AI and Photoshop, and it was like, this is the actual face of Emperor Tiberius. And Paul Wesley, to me, feels like, you may know William Shatner brilliantly playing Captain Kirk, but this is Captain Kirk. Although
Paul Wesley will be happy to hear that.
I mean, in one shot, he does look a little like Captain Jim Carrey, but the rest of the time, he is the actual historical face of Captain Kirk. But then, does he sound to you at all like Roy Cohn?
And I think that the death sentence imposed by Judge Irving R. Kaufman and the Adams spy trial had a very strong deterrent effect. I think it's been a very good year on the anti-communist front in this country.
I'm saying caution means you're not going to put everything you have into the punch. And that's a good way to lose, because your enemy will see that and act accordingly.
All this because of a second's delay?
Tell me I'm wrong.
Like, we forget that in Balance of Terror, the episode on which this last episode is based, Kirk was constantly like, my God, Bones, decisions make me pass out. But in this one, he's like, look, you never, ever threaten unless you're going to follow through. Punch the guy first. And he's so intense about that he's basically got Pike saying like, I am not soft on Romulans. Like what, what do you make of him being this incredibly combative guy, other than just creating drama in the moment and making the peace case?
They like to, they talk a lot in the press right now of like, this portrayal of Kirk is obviously not the Kirk that we get to know later on, because it's a different timeline essentially. Okay. So he's different in some respects. So like maybe that fills in for part of it. I took it as like throughout Balance of Terror, Kirk is having these moments, especially with McCoy, where he's just like talking about the rigors of command. But I think ultimately where his gut comes from in that episode is still aggressive forward. Yeah. So that made sense to me. And I think it would make sense for him to be able to be that open with someone who's the same rank as he is.
Yeah. That makes sense. And and also in the moment, his ego's bruised, his ship is far worse than bruised. And you'd think that he would maybe be overstating the case for smashing, crushing your enemies.
That's also an interesting discussion. Because he even says when they're having the drink at the end, it's like, did it ever occur to you that like there are situations where sometimes you have to punch your way out? And I wonder about that often. I think my favorite Star Trek is still being in beige pajamas and saying like, we probably shouldn't scan them because they may think our scan is a weapon, and maybe and Star Trek constantly, even in its very first, in original series, is constant fisticuffs. So you think you're buying it a little bit. You feel that in some circumstances. I'm glad that it's brought up as a point of debate, because much the same way as it is today, it's like, hey, we have to be able to talk things out. But then on the other end of it is it okay to punch Nazis in the face?
You used the best possible example. Bravo.
So where do we draw the line of like obvious? Where is there a line of discourse is no longer functional for maintaining the greater good? Yeah. And where is that line?
Yeah. Oh, it's so interesting, isn't it?
That episode raises that question really well, because it essentially tells Pike, it's like, you're not the right guy for that job.
Yeah.
Like it's somebody else needs to be in that situation. Otherwise we're all in for a world of hurt.
Yeah. That's so interesting. It's funny too, that I feel like I may have edited out that conversation in my memory. It's like, it's the last scene of the last episode. They're having a Saurian brandy.
It's before he jumps back to his own time. Monster Maroon Pike
I was gonna bring that
is
up.
giving him oh my god,
it's Monster Maroon, but it's got the Pirelli tires like texture on the sides, and it has the longest like attachment to the flap.
It's a much more dramatized, I don't know what the best way is, but it looks like the concept art version of
and you're
the
exactly
uniform.
Right. And it's funny with these shows, you do, even the Star Wars ones, maybe especially the Star Wars ones, you get a sense of going through the old like Ralph McQuarrie drawings, or in this case, Bob Fletcher. But it's interesting because because I am an ancient man, of the generation where the Monster Maroon was like, that looks like an actual space uniform.
Yeah.
But now it's clearly in that same stylized world as these original series costumes, because they're applying that texture on the sleeves. And it's funny because now Monster Maroon, to me, it just looks like very Christmassy to me. It looks like a Space Santa kind of outfit.
It's very red.
Yeah. Did you?
Especially when everybody's wearing that same color.
His first line as Future Pike, I thought we were gonna be seeing DeForest Kelley. He sounded so much like Bones to me when he says like,
"You'll figure out how to say it. Trust me."
But it's a great performance. I just was like, whoa, what are we about to see Bones? What's happening?
They did. Apparently, I was listening to the Greatest Generation podcast. They do their own stuff, and they got early screeners of these episodes. And one of them was actually talking about, he felt like in one of the early screeners he got before the release that actually ended up on Paramount Plus, that they had done some CGI aging that they later removed.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so like so there may have been in the initial idea that he was going to look much older than he actually appears in the episode.
It's very convincing.
So that makes sense. Assuming those uniforms show up about the same time that they show up normally, he's been fighting that war for almost 20 years.
Yeah. The timeline thing, I think, is such a great solution to the prequel problem of like, we know everybody's going to be okay. And just the sight of Spock, absolutely, looking like
he belonged in Saving Private
exactly.
Ryan.
Or he looks like avocado toast, like he just is this mashed up green pulp, and it's like this could happen anytime on the show, and I really think it's pretty brilliantly done.
I was worried about it initially because I think I saw the stills of like, are they actually going to do the Romulans? How are they going to do the Romulans ahead of before we're supposed to see the Romulans? And I was like, oh, this is clever.
Yeah.
Okay, I could buy this. I like this little story.
Yeah, absolutely. I did have, like, I love the whole show, and in retrospect, I even bits that I'm sort of like, I don't know if I cared for that. As I've said, like, I now love it. But did you have a sense with that last episode of like, why wasn't it this the whole time?
What is like all of it in an alternate past, or
no, just meaning the way that last episode worked just felt like they've cracked it. This is exactly what it's supposed to be now. Like,
yeah, I'm hoping that's kind of where they've now gotten to. Because I think the weakest episode for me might still be the first one, and I like the first one. Because I think it's the one that is the most still coming out of like a certain tone that they're trying to adjust for.
Yeah.
And over the course of the series of the first season, they get to where you feel like this show belongs to be.
Yeah.
So I'm really hoping that they maintain that for season 2.
How was it? I know,
which they've already shot. So
that's what I was going to say. Was the whole season shot in one go, or did they have a chance to kind of go back and fix things? Like what you're describing, where you felt the first one didn't work so great. Like, was that a learning curve, or was that just the way this thing was developed as one big binge?
I'm pretty sure they shot both seasons back to back.
Okay.
So they essentially it's like they did a 20 episode run of just this.
Yeah.
So I feel like, thinking back to Star Trek of old, where you would do 26 episodes in a year, like it takes some time to get to where you want to be with a lot of Star Trek shows. I think that's like one of the things that has hobbled some of the other shows, not just Star Trek, but just like 20 years ago, you had a lot more runway to figure yourself out.
Yep.
And now it's like, Stranger Things is a season of Stranger Things is 6 episodes, and it all comes out at once.
Yeah.
So
it
like
costs $1 billion.
If there's and so there's you can't tweak it. Like you're not getting any of the feedback. You can't correct anything.
Yeah.
It's already been out. It's like a movie. It's just been put out there, and that's what it is. But I'm hoping at least that, despite the fact that they didn't have to worry about nerd rage stuff happening, and I mean, they've obviously were reading it all of that happening for the other shows.
Yeah.
So I think part of that was in their minds when they were doing this. But I think being able to get into a groove of doing 20 episodes almost in a row, and I'm hoping that only means that it's going to get stronger.
Yeah. When does season 2 come out?
Probably not till next year, I would imagine.
It is really. I mean, I guess there's something to having a little bit of a pause as opposed to oversaturating things, but
I mean, they're still saturating, because what it is they have enough. We went from there were 5 Star Trek shows at the end of 2005, and it took 20 years to get those 5 shows.
Yeah.
Another 5 shows have cropped up in the last
4 minutes.
Years. Yeah. And they're on a rotation. Like, now that Strange New Worlds is over, Lower Decks starts up in later August. Then it's probably going to be another season of Discovery after that. Yeah. And then it's going to be the final season of Picard, and then we're back into Strange New Worlds again. So it's there, making sure that you keep that Paramount Plus subscription.
Yeah, that's true. For some reason, I felt the other ones had kind of hit the stops. Like it's nice to know it's all ongoing.
Yeah. I am still very much a fan of Lower Decks.
Oh my God,
I like the tongue in cheek with which it approaches. I don't know if you've caught.
I've seen the first episode. I'm such a fan of Tawny Newsome, and and I think that tone contributes. I think it's a tide that lifts all starships here, because having that around lets them do things like have the Gerald Fried fight song fairly seriously in episode 5 of Strange New Worlds. And it works great. You know, like it's a lighter universe that's exploring a bunch of things at once, and it never becomes kind of self-parody.
The music on this show is amazing. I have to actually give props to the composer. What's her name?
Nami Melumad.
Yeah, the reverence with which she approaches the old themes, but still uses them, but then also fits in her music to work with it all. Like one of the first things I told you was I love the theme of this show.
Yeah, that was the first thing. Just listening to the theme by itself because you sent it was kind of my first exposure to this.
Yeah.
And I loved it. I love that there's a theremin in it, which you feel like it's going to be in Star Trek, but I think this might be the first theremin we've heard, even though it's such a sci-fi. It's funny because it's in The Day the Earth Stood Still, which, of which Pike is a big fan. But I think in the original series, it was always a singer doing that melody.
Yeah, I'm trying. What's the in the cage, that love scene.
Shoot! Yeah, I think you're right.
When they're like looking at the flowers.
Yep. Well, I think that's a Farfisa organ.
Oh,
which is but you're right. There may be. It's so funny because I was going to bring up the transporter sound too.
Yeah,
because I was touched that they used the cage transporter sound, which makes beaming sound like it involves a lot of flywheels and that there are belts involved, none of which are working.
Yes.
Like it just sounds like super broken. But yeah, the now official original series transporter sound is in the cage, but it's in that weird vibrating musical plant. And I think that is a Farfisa organ, but they hold different leaves and different aspects of the sound stop and start. So I would not be surprised if there's also a theremin happening in there. I was equally touched that they don't use Shouty Spock from the cage.
Oh my God.
Ethan Peck never
Check
goes. Exactly. That's the line. That's the line.
I wrote a Star Trek spec script just to keep my writing juices flowing. And I was the first line of this script is going to be check the circuit because it just has to be.
Check the circuit. All operating, sir. Can't be the screen then. Definitely something out there, Captain. Headed this way.
No, I've been very pleased with this Technicolor modern portrayal of Star Trek.
It's so beautiful, right? The Technicolor, you've hit it on the head there. And it's reverence and its intelligence, in terms of the design, in terms of everything, but in terms of the design, I went to, I almost fell off my couch for joy when I saw that all the little table lamps are Arne Jacobsen. He's an architect who designed a college that I went to.
Yeah. And
he designed that college, including the lamps, all the way down to the weird early 60s futuristic silverware. Mm-hmm. And I found out that our dining room silverware was the stuff Stanley Kubrick picked out for the Discovery in 2001: A Space Odyssey. And I was so I saw the table lamp, Dr. Mbenga's table lamp is an Arne Jacobsen one. Pike's fireplace is in the shape of two Arne Jacobsen lamps.
Oh yeah.
And it got my hopes up. It was maybe they've got the silverware too. And they do. It took till episode 9 till we get a good look at La'an's fork.
Yep.
And it sure does look like the Jacobsen thing. Yeah, you can eat orange mush or waffle. Yeah, exactly. They're eating delicious things as opposed to strained sweet potatoes or whatever that was.
Yeah.
But I again, it's also interesting because there's a wonderful book called Star Trek Designing the Final Frontier, which I heard about through the wonderful podcast ABCDTOS. Mm-hmm. It's by Chavkin and McGuire, and both of them went through every episode of the original series looking for all of the mid-century modern props they bought, just stuff that was available at the time. And I think Arne Jacobsen he was never in the original series. And I always thought if I ever made a Star Trek thing, it would just be brutalist Jakobsen, and finally, every single light, including the ones people are passionately, gazing into in that episode, are Arne Jakobsen things. So anyway, so now officially the Enterprise and the Discovery share the same
cutlery,
the same dinette. Yeah, exactly.
Which I like that blend of being able to be like retro future, like that kind of look. So I very, very much a fan of that, and just bringing like multicolored things back into, because I don't know if you've seen any of The Expanse, but it's not exactly like we're still recovering from the aesthetics of the Battlestar Galactica reboot, which I love, but it's designed to look like a war movie.
Yeah.
And I very much, if you're gonna do non-dystopic or dystopian sci-fi tales, remove yourself from the war footage look.
It's so that's all sort of gunmetal and drab.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
It's and shot very much in line with like as if it's Saving Private Ryan or it's like a documentary film crew type of thing.
Lots of bleach and like the shutter angle is really stuttery. Yeah. I don't. It was so funny. I remember in one of the episodes of Strange New Worlds, they mentioned supply chain problems, and I said to myself, "This is supposed to be escapism." And so I wouldn't be able to take Expanse gunmetal and drab. No.
Yeah. I think that was the pirate episode.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's the one. I think that's exactly it.
Serene Squall.
Because they're navigating like these difficult issues, but you're right. It's not depressing. I just can't. It's just such a magic trick that there's such a lift from all these episodes, even though they're talking about fairly serious things.
Yeah. I think it's the fact that they approach all of it with a, for lack of better parlance, like a go get 'em attitude.
Yeah, that's right. It would be Pollyanna-ish to do anything different. Yeah,
except for maybe the one with the kid.
Lift us where suffering cannot reach.
Yes.
I wonder if they're trying to undo the kind of colonial prime directive smashing thing where Kirk was always blowing up a computer that ran a government, just over and over again. In Taste of Armageddon.
You're in error.
Yeah, exactly. The Landru Red Hour one.
Yeah.
Whereas this one, it's like, I can't do it. This is heartbreaking. I can't do anything about it. I don't know why it's funny. I'd never thought of Pike as slow on the uptake until you just mentioned it. But now I realize how long it took him, that he was basically in a Logan's Run kind of situation in that episode. Like, Chris, the kid's doomed. I don't know why you have to see the previous doomed kid in order to appreciate this.
Yeah, come on, Soylent Green's people.
That was it. That's right. Yeah, Utopia is kid computers.
Yeah. And to me, there's still, I mean, I understand it's still supposed to be a Bible story, but like, there's some more holes in that one of like, can't they move away from the planet? Like, would all their problems be solved if they moved away from the planet? Is that okay?
Yeah, there are. Yeah, it's hard not to box yourself in, I guess, doing stories on this scale.
And for me, that always, the suspension of disbelief boils down to like, is it cool or is it not cool? Because I'll put up with it if it's cool.
I guess it's like the uniforms. It's stylized. It doesn't have to track,
At least they have away team jackets now. Like,
well, I wanted to talk to you about those away team jackets.
Yeah.
And in conjunction with one other interesting costume / staging thing. And that is when Una turns in her badge. And so between that and the leather jackets, I sometimes just got this sense of like, they're cops. And I sort of, I kind of already struggle with people in Starfleet being the Royal Navy, like Horatio Hornblower.
Yeah.
Because as I said, again, I like it when they're in the beige onesies, and saying like, don't offend them with our scans. So I wondered what you thought about that, because it's just a graphics thing, and I know there have been cool jackets in Star Trek, from the
forever,
beginning.
yes.
So yeah, I wondered what your sense, especially of like, I'm handing in I guess they call it a Delta Shield, as if it's some kind of official thing.
Which they do that a lot in Star Trek over the course of time. Like,
has anyone ever handed in the thing?
There's sequences where characters will take off their badges to show that they are off the record, and like,
cool. Okay.
There's a moment in Insurrection where when Picard decides to go off the reservation, he takes his pips off.
Oh, wow.
He's like,
okay.
And like, so like that, I feel like that's in the visual language of Star Trek still.
Oh, good. Okay. So I now feel so much better. I realize it's just been a case of me being asleep at the helm somewhat.
I enjoyed one of the things, the improvements I thought with Wrath of Khan, with the visual language of like uniforms and stuff, is that not everybody's wearing the same set of things, because if you're an engineer, you need to wear specialized equipment.
Yes, absolutely.
And I liked having a little bit of that utilitarian stuff happening, where like, yeah, of course, like if you go down to the cold planet, you're going to wear a jacket. And you don't want to end up like poor Sulu on the water disease planet.
Yes. The water disease. Tourism is booming at the water disease planet.
It's the Naked Time planet, and I can't remember.
Yeah. I can't, where he's got that extraordinary dog.
Yes, but then he gets stuck with somebody down on the planet, and there's a blizzard coming through, and they're or no, am I no,
I think
I'm sorry,
that's
Turnabout. No, that's Enemy Within. I'm sorry.
Enemy Within, because the transporter's broken. They're on a planet. They, again, speaking of it being very easy to box yourself in.
Yeah.
They had shuttlecraft at that point. I don't know why they couldn't have just sent the
I don't even know if there was a line
down
about it. Yeah. But yeah, poor Sulu's had eaten up a rock with his phaser, because he literally just brought down his velour t-shirt and his capri pants.
And it's so much. I mean, I have great affection for the shimmering yellow-orange outline that they would have, projected by a belt in the animated series.
Yes.
When they needed that velour shirt to do double duty in a cold or airless climate.
Yes. But I appreciate
cool jackets.
Yes.
Yeah, it's true. You've completely turned me around on that one. Now, thinking in metaphors again and talking about the Serene Squall.
Yes.
Two things about that episode that I wondered what your thoughts were on. I'm not sure I buy a Vulcan prison, even if it is rehabilitative.
I forgot about this whole thing.
And I especially am not sure I buy it if it is a giant Zen rock garden, and that kind of makes me extra uncomfortable. So that's issue one. I wonder what your thoughts were about that, because I can be convinced about these things, clearly.
So, yeah, I think there are penal colonies in Star Trek later on, and at least
Tantalus
the Federation
one.
Well, there's Tantalus, yes. Yeah. But like,
it's almost like a Club Med, Jim.
Well, and that's in Voyager. I think we first meet helmsman Tom Paris on a penal colony in New Zealand, and it seems to be just like an open garden. Yes.
Yeah.
And so I it's the idea of rehabilitation as opposed to incarceration and punishment, which I appreciate.
Yeah, sort of a restorative justice future.
Not
even. It's like forgiveness and rehabilitation, and then re-injection into society, which is a very beautiful vision.
Yeah, so I maybe the universal translator hiccups and calls it a prison.
Yeah,
and so I'm allowed to. Yeah,
right.
I can think of it that way.
Yeah,
but for me, I'm like, because Vulcans have a history of being weird with anybody who doesn't conform to their society. So
yeah.
I'm just assuming that the individual of whom we are speaking, who is incarcerated.
Oh my God! I did. Yeah, we haven't even gotten to that yet.
Yeah.
Holy cow!
I imagine he was maybe rabble rousing, and they're like, "Hey, we can't have that on this planet."
It's weird to think of him as being still on Vulcan, though. It seemed like his path was more It's interesting because then that makes him more of a con man than an eremite, wandering around the deserts of space.
So, and for anybody who hasn't watched the episode, Cybok appears.
You made that up.
I did not.
You did too. Cybok couldn't possibly be your brother because I happen to know for a fact you don't have a brother.
Technically, you are correct. I do not have a brother.
You see?
I have a half-brother.
I gotta sit down.
Much to my surprise.
Yeah. What was that thought when at the end of that episode is the stinger?
This is the thing. And this was the second question I was going to ask you about Serene Squall. Speaking of Gene Roddenberry's foundational texts, and again, I don't want to invest too much authority in them because it's not,
Hashtag love instructors.
Exactly. That is the example that has come to mind every single time you've brought up that beautiful novel, which I nevertheless love.
Yes.
Does the Serene Squall fail the test Gene Roddenberry puts into the beginning of the TOS Writer's Guide, which is, when you come up with a plot, dear writer, make sure, I'm not quoting him, but this is sort of the gist of it, make sure it would be believable on a present day, which for him was early mid-60s, U.S. aircraft carrier. And so your question about if Cybok kind of hit me at the end of the episode, the plot seems to be, if I've got it right, I want to get my husband out of jail, and his brother serves on an aircraft carrier. So I'm going to enlist a pirate crew to take over the aircraft carrier so that his fiancée, who once walked through the prison, can get my husband sprung from jail.
Yes.
But the thing is now, so that was what I was kind of thinking about at the end of the episode. But I don't mean to say that critically of the episode, because the world is currently strange enough where I could see opening up a newspaper and reading that a scenario like that has actually played out. Yeah. So Cybok didn't bug me. I was like, well, okay, I guess also Cybok. All right.
I love that we're re-embracing Star Trek V.
Yeah, well, Star Trek V and I have been locked in an embrace ever since 1989.
I couldn't help but notice your pain.
My pain?
It runs deep. Share it with me.
But yeah, what did you make of that? Do you think first of all, have I actually got the story right, or is this kind of like a fever dream?
It's the other part is that the pirate captain.
Angel.
Captain Angel.
Dr. Aspen / Captain Angel.
Yes. Yeah. So the other added element to that is Captain Angel, who is already a pirate captain, has an established pirate thing going on. Has assumed the identity of a credentialed professional that would be on the ship. So like I can buy, because if somebody was like Russian agent masquerades as, as ship psychiatrist on, Carl Vinson and waters them into Somali pirate territory. And
that's the one missing piece, that they are already aboard the Enterprise and can infiltrate it, as you're saying, in a kind of cloak and dagger way.
Yes, the false pretense. And honestly, up until the turn, I didn't see it coming. I
mean, that you got to give it that. Like I
bought into the Dr. Aspen character, and I was like, oh, this is a character who's going to test Spock's stuff and is his brain and where he's sitting. And then you have the sequence in engineering, and it's like, oh no, they have a pistol trained on everybody now.
Yeah. You're right. It does. Yes. And with that extra piece added in, I could imagine reading this in a newspaper about precisely that carrier. So now I got to watch it again and see if Cybok takes me out of it at the very end. I don't know. That's the thing. Like I usually, it doesn't, it seems like to watch these things, Star Trek or Star Wars, just because you see familiar stuff again is kind of the wrong emphasis. But I really I had so much genuine delight in the Balanchine wraparound tunic, or hearing Scotty just off camera.
Oh my God.
Or in this case,
was it the hand that's supposed to be missing a finger though?
Oh my God, we got to go back and look at it, because again, they have done all this so lovingly that I bet they replicated Jimmy Doohan's, hand Because I didn't even think, I think I was so excited about it that I wasn't looking closely enough. I'm not even sure I realized it was his hand.
Not even, but on top of that Jeffries tube, which shows up in
the
several episodes. Like, it's
my
perfect.
God. I'm such a doof because I totally went for all this stuff.
Yes. I think the Star Wars Minute podcast talks about it when they talk about references, where it's like 80% of it's going to work for you and 20% of it isn't. And which 80% and which 20% depends on the person.
I can't think of anything that made me mad, though. Can you? Was there anything that struck you as like, oh, come on? What do you take me for?
The only thing was like having to make the big bad characters the Gorn. I was like, man, we didn't have to do that.
Yeah, I guess that has its own issues too, though.
Yeah, but ultimately, I the only concern I generally have is that when you make all these references, it makes the world feel smaller.
Yeah.
But we already have Cybok, and we already...
And that story connects them already. Like,
yes.
Of course it would be Cybok because Dr. Aspen / Angel is after Spock. So that fact would bring those elements of the world together as opposed to it being a random...
And that all makes sense.
Yeah.
So like all of those little moments to me they don't bother me because again, the captain's wraparound is just a duty uniform.
I take it back. There is one thing that made me mad, and that is that it has both insignia on it.
Oh, you're right. Yeah.
It doesn't just have the waist one.
Yes,
which I always thought was really cool. But I wonder if it didn't have that and you just see him, because I think you see him first in a close up, you'd be like, why is he wearing that nice leather sweater?
Yeah, that's the other thing is that I feel like for the captain's wraparound, I don't know if that's the material that you choose. Like I feel like it still should be a little bit more breathable. Like, that's kind of the whole point of that particular uniform.
It's the same problem that movies based on comic books, I think, encountered in their costume design. That you need to give. It can't just be spandex, because that gets wrinkly and weird and seems thin, and you want it to feel like higher resolution than that. So the solution has been initially, and we see it here, to texturize and put a million, micro delta shields on people. So but and which seems weird until I wonder if it's kind of like building security devices into money.
Yeah. That's what I was.
Like it's a micro pattern that you could check to see if this is the real deal. I mean, I don't know, but then like phase 2 of that solution has been that in comic book movies and now here, you build these suits and they start to look like the upholstery of very expensive cars.
Yeah.
Especially the spacesuits, where actually the spacesuits in this I think are lovely because they remind me of the wonderful, very striking ones from the original series, but they also look they partake slightly of the design of fancy Scandinavian vacuum cleaners.
Yeah, and maybe it's just me being of my age and what I grew up used to, but I felt like the medium was either the Monster Maroon setup or the Mandarin collar TNG uniforms.
Yeah. Oh, it's so fantastic. Yeah. It's the Monster Maroon I loved, especially because it felt really real at the time, and it was trying to make this thing recall actual like naval uniforms, which is a little fraught, I guess, for me. But I loved also that you could do stuff with it. The flap could come down. Mm-hmm. I love that they used that for a blood stain in Star Trek 2. But yeah, now for some reason it really does feel kind of Santa Claus-y.
It's the red. If it were in any other muted color, I feel like it would be okay, because what they did the weird thing of like division colors became the collar, which are very, I think essentially almost whatever the division colors were in the motion picture. So
it's the same ones. Yeah.
So they chose the beige earth tones for division colors, and everybody got red for the primary.
Yeah. And those were, I think it's a gabardine fabric that was repurposed from motion picture costumes. Okay. And according to interviews with Robert Fletcher, that stuff or that particular, instance of that gabardine could only take 3 colors. And one of I think the most the most saturated of the options was maroon. So I think in reaction to people thinking the motion picture costumes were too beigey, I never quite understood the objection to the beiginess of the costumes in motion picture, because if you look at that palette next to the Star Wars costume palette, they're almost identical. In fact, sometimes too close. There's a guy on the bridge at some point in Star Trek The Motion Picture who's basically wearing Luke's outfit from Star Wars.
Sulu's, I think his uniform in the first scene, it's kind of like a bathrobe thing on the top with a black t-shirt.
It's like half a gi and then, like the Luke had and the pants. And so, but I think for some reason, and again, that movie was a huge reaction against the original series, because it's the first time a movie's ever been made from a TV show. So they're worried it's going to be received as chintzy. Yeah. And TOS was designed to sell color TVs in the 60s. Yeah. So they've found it super garish, so I think it's these hard rudder
come all the way back.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because totally. we went from the end of the TNG era was black with gray top and just a small little sliver of color. And like the early Discovery uniforms were all monochrome with like a metallic division color delineation. We've just been slowly adding the Technicolor back into.
But yeah, it was interesting to see the Monster Maroon come back with the Pirelli tires thing on the
it was
on
nice.
The shoulders and arms.
That's the kind of little reference things that if you're not steeped in it like we are, you may not notice. You're like, oh, okay, that's the uniforms. But then you're what's his face? Leonardo DiCaprio with a beer pointing at the TV.
That was me a lot of the time over those 10 hours. I wonder if the hiring managers for Star Trek Strange New Worlds were doing little Easter egg references, because I noticed that one of the Emmy-nominated sound editors is named Matt Decker.
Oh, dear God.
Which, for the listener, if they are not as dorky as I am, is the name of the demoted Enterprise captain, Will Decker's dad, who Ahab chases the Doomsday Machine in the eponymous original series episode.
Yep. Commodore Matt Decker.
And I can see why they're Emmy nominated. The sound design is magnificent in the show on top of everything else. And I noticed that in your submarine, actually, no, sorry, it's in one of the 2 submarine combat episodes you get. Yeah. The final one, that scary plasma weapon that the Romulans use. Yeah. Right before it hits anything, it makes a jaguar scream. Also, in that combat scene, when they drive through the comet, I love that it turns both the bridges of the Enterprise and the Farragut into Studio 54. Yes. It's like I heard the little disco boo-da-boo drums in my head.
And it's all like not parroting, but homage to the way that they did some of the lighting in Balance of Terror.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Which again, I love that lighting, and it's been a quest of mine for some projects to find ways to pay homage to things, but make them fresh. Yeah. And this show does that so brilliantly, especially in that episode, but throughout.
Yeah. Between the sound and the lighting and everything, but also just the music again of recalling the little leitmotifs of the original series. Just the little stings, and it's all that you need, and it sets the right tone, and it's not too much. And I once this soundtrack becomes available, I'm going to buy it.
And the freshness of it too, because I love, again, the opening theme with its theremin. I love its, I guess, minor key kind of reimagining of the theme, but also it sounds to me like a halftime show. Did you notice that too? Like, it sounds like the University of Michigan Star Trek marching band is, I love the drums, and I love the, it's so cool.
It's that referential thing of evoking the optimism or the feel that none of us who were alive to experience it, but like the way that we imagine the mid 60s was.
Yeah.
Without going too much into Austin Powers territory.
Well, it's true, right? Because I dimly remember hearing or reading Alexander Courage talking about the inspiration, especially for those very large intervals in the theme where the melody soars like all the way up the octave. And I think by change the changes in this version, I'll have to listen to it, but maybe compress those leaps a little bit.
Yeah.
So you have the mid 60s as a kind of, it's a time of crisis, but it's also this time of Project Apollo and a feeling of possibility. And so it's a bit more soaring. And now we're, as we've been discussing, this is a show that's trying to give a little bit of hope in a time where people aren't really thinking, at least I'm not thinking we're going to get anywhere near a Star Trek future. And so there's more of a sense of crisis, and those intervals are squashed a little bit. But it's still very stirring and ends with hope.
We got the James Webb Space Telescope going. It took a little while, but we got there.
There's my, I was exiting the freeway the other day and I saw a picture of, I think, the Ring Nebula.
Yeah.
And it looked like an iPhone ad. And I was like, what? That can't. And then it was a parody ad by an aerospace company. And I can't remember which one. It was like shot on James Webb. And I almost crashed the car. I was like, that's the coolest thing in the world. So yeah, we do have the James Webb Telescope. But, sometimes I envy it that it's at Lagrange.
Yes.
And not here in the muck sometimes. But
I think the universe is telling me that some fates are inescapable. And even if I could get out of mine, it might just fall to someone else.
Dr. Mbenga. I was so excited that it was him.
Mm-hmm.
In the original series, that character made sickbay feel so much more real to have several doctors and specialists, especially when McCoy would defer to him.
Yeah.
And I loved his character in the original series because he was kind of like the nerdy doctor.
Yeah.
I in the new version, Babs Olusanmokun is so good. I'm glad that they downplay the idea of him being a specialist in Vulcans.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing about the original series version that made me feel like we never got a Vulcan doctor who specialized in humans.
Yeah. And
it's weird to me to think that you would go to Galactic Med School to learn, like, we just learn humans and then some specialists do the, like, exotic ones.
Yeah, yeah.
Especially considering that in Star Trek, we're all seeded from the progenitors anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered what your feelings were about Mbenga, and also, like, it's given his daughter being
in the transporter buffer,
in the pool filter. Yeah, exactly. Seems real risky compared to like a Space Seed style.
Yeah.
Suspended animation thing, especially if they have like a power failure. He is bringing her out into space with him where who knows what's gonna, hit the ship.
Not the least of which was the light virus.
Oh my God. But yeah, what are your thoughts on character and characterization this time around?
I'm glad they brought him in, and I'm glad that he's very much he's the inquisitive doctor.
That's it's that nerd thing from the original series. Even though Spock at one point yells at him in the original series for guessing about something, but I think that's on Spock because,
Yeah.
But yeah, tell me more about that. The inquisitive, nerdy Dr. Mbenga.
Yeah, I like he's the inquisitive. He's the one. He's doing research actively. You're seeing him try to figure things out. But like it's that also the crew of this Enterprise at this time. There's a softened edge to everything in a good way of just like. Yeah. He feels he has the right bedside manner. Like he's the doctor that you want to be treated by, much the same way that Pike is the captain that you want to lead to follow. So him being like compassionate, but not in a way that, McCoy might just bark at you. Like, that his heart's in the right place, but I don't know if I'd necessarily want him to be my doctor.
Yeah. Yeah. That was my sense. My sense was like, I do love Dr. McCoy, but I would want to ship out with Dr. Mbenga.
Yeah.
As long as we had resolved the thing that's distracting him.
Yes.
So that he could be fully present. But he is doing a heroic job of being, doing his job and also tending to the crisis in his family. But that was exactly my sense.
Yes.
Like, he's the one I want. I want Chapel and Mbenga on my medical team.
Yes. And it feels like it's assembling the people that you actually want to be running the ship.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I appreciate that. And I think the daughter arc, I like the fact that there was obviously something that he was trying to deal with. I was surprised that they resolved it in this season. I didn't mind the way that they did, but I could have done without the bit at the end where she comes back and is an adult and is like, no, you totally made the right decision. To just sort of leave.
It was very quick. Yeah.
Like I wanted it to be like, this is the best chance that I have for my daughter to have any kind of a life. So I'm going to let her go, and I'm going to have to trust that things will be okay down the road and leave that tension out there.
Yeah.
But the writers seem to be very determined to just sort of close that.
Yeah. And I wonder if it had to do with something that was bugging me, which is that it's very good and generous and loving of him to let her make the decision, but she is so young that you wonder, can she make the decision? So I think the solution to that might have been bring her back when she's 35 and she says, bravo, Dad.
Yeah.
You did a great job, and I'm now a Zephram Cochrane in a Zephram-like relationship with a cloud.
Yes. Which I
not the same kind of relationship, but a relation. Yeah. A very platonic cloud relationship.
Yes. And what's going on here seems pretty pervy, doesn't it?
Oh my God. All right. Now, please let me know if when the following thought occurred to me, it was an uncharitable one. And that is the idea of Lon Noonien Singh a little like, this is my chief security officer, Julia Caesar.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you looked familiar. And part of the reason this maybe bugged me at the time, although again, maybe I'm being uncharitable, is later they mention, I think over the PA, a Lieutenant Taft. And I'm like, is he also related to a historical world leader?
Yeah, that is, speaking of things of they didn't have to, that's the 20% that bothers me.
Yeah.
She doesn't have to have that
was my thought
attached to her.
That was my thought.
Because it's either Julius Caesar or, this is Joanna Hitler. She's
exactly. Nicole Ceausescu.
Yeah. So I understand the angle of making her more prejudiced toward learning that Una is an augment of some sort.
Yeah.
But you could just make her family someone who suffered at the hands of genetically engineered people. And she doesn't have to, because then that makes her family very tortured in many respects.
Yeah. She
in
has
too many ways.
That's right. She's got the Gorn and Khan, and we'll probably find out the Squire of Gothos messed with her.
Yeah.
At one point. Yeah, it's true.
Right now she just has her family has a very bad run of parasitic organisms.
It's true.
They're 2 for 2 right now, and I don't know if we're gonna go for 3.
Yeah, I still think I'm sure being uncharitable about it, or was at the time, because I love the character. I love Christina Chong's performance, and they are finding their footing. Their space
the fact
legs.
that it bothered me when I heard about it, and I haven't really thought about it since, is a good sign.
Now, Captain Battelle.
Yeah. Captain Winona Earp.
Oh my God, is that? Oh my God,
yeah, it's Winona Earp.
I forgot it. That's crazy.
Yeah,
I hadn't. She's very good. I hadn't made the connection at all.
Melanie was its name.
Melanie Scrofano.
Yes, very Italian name. Yes.
We're distantly or less distantly related. I don't know.
Yes, a paisano.
But it feels like it undoes a lot of weird, slightly dodgy affiliations we've seen between captains and their enlisted assistants.
Yes.
And I love, good morning, Captain. Good morning, Captain.
Yes.
And I also love that her name is almost Bechdel.
Oh, yeah.
Which I wonder if that was deliberate. I kind of hope it was. But yeah, so You feel the same way? It's
yes.
I mean, it's terrible then that she's the one who swoops in at the end and says, I'm just following orders and I'm going to arrest
But I think, but that gives a good because now like we've gotten Pike over his, like he's kind of like, okay, I know what fate I have awaiting me, and we can put that to bed for now. Now his next thing can be like, well, this relationship got really screwed up. How are we gonna pick up the pieces on this? Because what I want is for episode 1 to just be like Measure of a Man, except it's her squaring off against him in the courtroom.
Yeah.
And
that's great.
In a court martial. And like they have to go then, because then they have to go from that to maybe the tension of, do they repair that relationship?
I never thought about it. The Measure of a Man is a great template for it. And it is funny to think of like, if you prick us, do we not bleed?
But you have the same setup where like Picard knows the judge advocate.
Yeah.
And they have a history because she presided over the court martial of the Stargazer loss.
Which is like court martial in the original series where Kirk knows the, I guess, attorney on the other side from him.
Eject pod.
Oh my God. Now speaking, sorry, go ahead.
Well, yeah, no. And I love, and that actually, weirdly enough, Enterprise also did a version of this where they had, it's Scott Bakula's character, Captain Archer, and Captain Hernandez of the Columbia, which was the other sister ship, of them actually having of having equals in a relationship like this, where you don't have to worry about taking advantage of a weird power dynamic, which was
that a big issue in TOS.
Yes.
I think at one point McCoy even just says, right, got its privileges.
Yeah,
and
it's bad.
There's
also a couple of episodes where it's like, oh yeah, Scotty can't be around women because he hates them right now.
Oh my God. The Wolf in the Fold. It's so weird. It's so weird. And then they leave him, I think, not only with a woman, but with like a knife.
Yeah.
At one point in that episode.
Yeah.
It's very weird. That's one thing Star Trek really struggled with a lot from the beginning and through the 80s. And
I mean, and I mean, we like to attribute it mostly to just Gene Roddenberry's rewrites, but I'm sure it was also
in the air. Oh my God, they really, really struggled with that.
Yeah. But yes, I like that relationship. I'm curious to see what they do with it. Like I said, I'm waiting for my courtroom drama episode.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really cool that like it's designed to be consumed over time, but also binged. And so it has it's almost like a good set in a concert.
Yeah.
The mood is, it never gets ponderous.
Yeah. It
with one
eases
thing
up
or another.
Yeah.
And the structure changes too. I noticed that some episodes, the teaser is like 20 minutes long, basically. Like you don't get the credits till like a third of the way in.
Yeah.
And is that a thing structurally that's happening in other series?
Yeah. There are ones where they play around with the teaser act. There are shows where like some episodes it's 30 seconds and then we go into the credits, or sometimes it is like you're 20 minutes in and suddenly now we're having the credit sequence.
It's very refreshing. I like that looseness with it a lot.
Yeah.
Now, Spock slugging Barjan as T'Pring.
Yes.
It made me think that's the whole, like, Spock not hitting someone is the whole reason we have the neck pinch.
Yeah.
Leonard Nimoy reads the script for Enemy Within. He's like, Spock wouldn't clonk someone over the head, so let's do something a little more elegant. I don't know. What did you think about that? That whole scene. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, I think I chalk all that up to we're still dealing with a younger, less disciplined, more human Spock. And that's the side that comes out when there is an outburst.
Yes. Occasionally berserker yelling.
Yes.
He's young enough for that. And it makes sense. It sounds like the kind of guy who would go for Kalinar at some point.
Yeah.
Just out of fear that his emotions are not containable.
Yeah. But I do love that episode of the actors switching roles.
We may have to seek some help with this.
There is one more chant I'd like to try. We might need a gong.
Now, Pike has a panic attack in the presence of his adoring fan.
Yes.
Young Ma'at.
Yes.
And I could picture Ma'at walking through his own slow motion, blurry hallway full of echoes right after that. And it landed especially hard for me because I once scared Buzz Aldrin pretty bad into Barnes and Noble, and it messed me up a little bit.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I was like, I'm scarier than going to the moon in a skyscraper full of kerosene.
Oh, no.
It's another perfect tonal thing for doing that magic trick we've been talking about, which is making optimistic sci-fi in a time when not all that many people are optimistic, and actually having a character confront doom, known doom, is such a great way to do it. And again, it's not ponderous. There is a sense of either making the most of the time he's got or finding some way out of that crisis. And especially that it's by fire feels like the thing that a lot of people are worrying about right now, that's making, me feel really doomy about stuff.
Yeah.
It's really great.
Yeah. And it's the thing that doesn't happen very much anymore, just by virtue of the fact that it's probably considered a very passé screenwriting technique, which is the speech. But letting Anson Mount give the Pike speeches every couple episodes, especially the one in the first episode with the one, like I even say, like that first episode for me, it was the weakest, but at the end, the speech that he gave about like that life should be worn gloriously because up until your last moment, your future is what you make it. Like that's Star Trek. You can play around with the set dressings and the costumes and all that sort of stuff, but there needs to be that core theme of adversity will always exist, but how we approach it we should approach it with optimism or a problem solver mentality.
It's funny that now I think, that scene where Kirk sounds to me a little maybe like Roy Cohn.
Yeah.
Is like not the violence part of it, but it occurs to me that Chris Pike has something to learn, at least from our timeline's Jim Kirk. Yeah. And it's very stark in that scene because they make reference to risk. He says, I'm more risk averse than you are. And I realize that's the quintessential Kirk speech.
Yeah.
Risk is our business,
From another mediocre episode where it's like, oh, that speech is great, but the rest of it's kind of weird.
I feel again like a subaltern Star Trek fan, but I'm now blanking. Oh, it's the one with the orbs and Sargon.
Is it Return to Tomorrow?
Yeah, I think that's the name of it. It's Your Captain Has a Wonderful Body episode.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
And that's the speech that leads to that moment.
They used to say that if man were meant to fly, he'd have wings. But he did fly. He discovered he had to. I don't believe we can stop. In fact, through all our existence, the frightened and faint-hearted have been warning men not to push any further, not to learn any more, not to hope, grow, and exceed themselves. I'm in command. I could order this. But I'm not. Because Dr. McCoy is right in pointing out the enormous danger potential in any contact with life and intelligence as fantastically advanced as this. But I must point out that the possibilities, the potential for knowledge and advancement is equally great. Risk is our business. That's what this starship is all about. That's why we're aboard her.
But that's what I'm saying. Like it's the medium as the message kind of situation that like one of the things I love about it, in addition to hope in imperfect times, is that imperfect people get to this better future.
Yeah.
And the very substance of the show or the movie is often failing in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And the thing itself is made out of cardboard and has the occasional clunker of a line and let that work against your TNG era anxiety about qualifying for things and your own writing, which you've brought up, like, and your own work, like we're striving for things. It's not going to be perfect, but we'll get there.
I'm making memories Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, remember to like and subscribe. Follow us on Instagram at No Flicks Given Podcast. See you next time.
Don't let Gene near any of this stuff anymore.